Public policy expert and political strategist William Barclay. William, welcome back to Victory News.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
All right, so you wrote an article about this entitled Irina Zarutska and the Consequences of the DEI Agenda. Tell us how you see diversity, equity, and inclusion coming into play during this tragic murder.
Well, before the publishers changed it, the article was originally titled Irina Zarutska, Identity Politics and the Open Persecution of Whites in America. So that should maybe tell you in a nutshell how I see DEI and the modern advent of identity politics playing into all of this. But yeah, I think that despite the fact that America is once an exemplar of pluralism and the earnest fellowship of diverse peoples and human beings, it's clear that the modern advent of identity politics has transformed the pursuit of diversity into an instrument of oppression and a political mechanism that leftists everywhere now routinely leverage in order to legitimize and encourage the persecution of any sufficiently undiverse or white person. That's because due to this modern advent of identity politics, the legitimacy of any person or people's respective social plight and perspective, indeed their ability to suffer itself, has become contingent upon their ability to immediately display this diversity criteria and intersectional location upon the so-called spectrum of identity. And moreover, it's become nigh inconceivable that any person or community might suffer, become marginalized and oppressed without explicitly exhibiting any of the necessary diversity criteria. In fact, the modern gospel of identity politics and its intersectional apostles have decreed that anyone who is sufficiently undiverse or white is not merely incapable of any socio-political suffering, but is actually themselves a source of political malaise and a locus of oppression. And as a result, it has become completely legitimate and even subtly encouraged to abuse and persecute any person or peoples in America who do not immediately and apparently display the appropriate diversity criteria and can be at all labeled as white. For example, over the past decade, white people in America have been routinely forced to endure explicit political persecution and oppression at the hands of various unscrupulous left-wing political actors and discriminatory DEI legislation. But more importantly, throughout the modern era, it has become commonplace for any minorities or people who are sufficiently diverse, such as Black people and trans individuals, to openly abuse and attack white people in America and commit explicit hate crimes without consequence. Irina Zarutska's murder has actually vividly underscored one of modern America's most macabre truths. Any white person can currently be further persecuted or even murdered in America, and nothing but silence will echo out.
I'm so glad that you called it the gospel of diversity, because it really is like a religious cult. And thank you for pointing that out. And it shows us how far we have slipped or accepted this. Now, William, watch as Virginia Republican gubernatorial candidate Winsome Sears asked her opponent, Abigail Spanberger, to request Democratic AG candidate Jay Jones to step down for his text that wished a Republican would get 2 bullets in the head. Here she is.
The murder, Abigail, the murder of a man, a former speaker, as well as his children who were 2 and 5 years old. You have little girls. What would it take him pulling the trigger? Is that what would do it? And then you would say he needs to get out of the race?
So Spanberger refused to ask Jones to step down. Do you think that was a campaign-defining moment for Ms. Sears?
Absolutely. I think that her opponent's silence was deafening. At the moment that Ms. Sears confronted Spanberger and she refused to answer, Sears became the embodiment, the living voice for countless Americans, and really exposed and permitted all of America a very rare glimpse into the true essence and core of the Democratic Party. They do, in fact, condone political violence, and very much as a result of the modern advent of identity politics. To them, identities rather than actions are wrong. And so you must apologize for your identity and not your actions. As we always say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Yeah. And I think that what we saw ultimately on that stage was Miss Spanberger wither away in the sun, while Miss Spears now gets to bask in her own victory in those same sun rays.
It's not just a class of ideas now. Really and truly, the soul of America is kind of at risk here in this election. Listen, be sure to follow William Barclay on X at Will Barclay PCBG. Will, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Mike?
Thank you, Greg. An explosion took place this morning at a military munitions factory.